Good morning, good afternoon, or good night to those checking in to see how the library is doing. This is our fourth installment of our Magic Treehouse series, and we're going to be reading, once again, Polar Bears Past Bedtime by Mary Pope Osborne. Last time, Jack and Annie met a group of friendly polar bears and had a little romp around the snow. However, their fun stirred up a little bit of trouble. And now they have to find their way across cracking ice and potentially past a polar bear mother. Let's see how they fare and where their adventure takes us this week. This is Polar Bears Past Bedtime by Mary Pope Osborne. Chapter 6, Flying Bears. The cubs whimpered louder. They want to go to her, but they're afraid of the ice, whispered Jack. Annie began petting the cubs. Don't be afraid, she told them. You'll get back to your mother. The big polar bear growled. She paced back and forth, sniffing the air. Annie kept patting the two cubs and whispering to them. Jack looked in his book for anything that might help, and finally he found something. Even though a female polar bear can weigh as much as 750 pounds, she can walk on ice, too thin to hold a person by balancing her weight and sliding on her paws over the ice. Oh man, that's incredible, whispered Jack. He watched the polar bear mother walk down the snowbank. On large, silent feet, she crept about at the edge of the frozen sea. She tried to step out onto the ice, but each time she did, it cracked, and she had to retreat. At last, she found a firm spot. Then, the polar bear stretched out her four legs and lay on the ice. Slowly, she moved forward, pushing herself with her claws. Is she coming for her babies? Said Jack. Or is she coming to get us? I don't know, said Annie. Hey, let's put on the masks. What for? Said Jack. Well, maybe they'll protect us, said Annie, and maybe she'll think we're polar bears too. Oh, brother, said Jack. But Annie gave him a bear mask, and he took off his glasses and slipped it on. Jack peered through the mask holes. It was hard to see the huge white bear sliding over the frozen sea. He squinted, and that helped. The polar bear looked at her cubs and let out a deep moan. The two little bears carefully went to their mother. She licked the cubs and touched her nose against each of theirs. Then they crawled onto her back. They're safe now, said Jack. Even if the mother breaks through the ice, she can swim with them to shore. Yeah, I just wish you wouldn't leave us behind, said Annie. The mother bear slowly turned her body around. Then she pushed off with her hind legs. With the cubs on her back, she began sliding away. Let's try moving like her, Annie said. But we could break through the ice and freeze to death, said Jack. If we stay here, we'll freeze too, said Annie. Remember, the seal hunter said his people had learned from the polar bears. Jack took a deep breath. Okay, he said, let's try it. He lay on his stomach, he spread out his arms and legs, and then he began to copy the bear. See, there's Jack and Annie sliding behind the polar bear and her cubs. Looks like it could be a bit of fun, no? He pressed his mittens against the ice and pushed off, sliding his feet. Amazingly, there was no cracking sound. Grrr, he growled. Then he pushed off again. Jack heard Annie sliding behind him, and then he kept going. He pushed and slid, and he pushed again and slid again. He made the movements over and over until something happened. He didn't feel like a boy anymore. He felt like a polar bear. Then Jack felt something even stranger. He felt like a flying polar bear. Jack swirled along as if his arms and legs were giant wings, and the moonlit sea ice was a sky of glass. He remembered what the seal hunter had said. Polar bears can fly. Chapter 7, Spirit Lights. Jack, you can get up now, said Annie. Jack opened his eyes. Annie was standing over him. She still had her mask on. We're on safe ground, she said. Jack felt as if he'd been dreaming. He looked around. They had reached the tundra at the edge of the frozen sea. The cubs were romping around in the distance, but their mother was sitting nearby, gazing at Jack and Annie. She waited to make sure we were safe, said Annie. Jack stared at the polar bear in awe. The words of the seal hunter came back to him. Always thank the animal spirits. We should thank the polar bear spirit now, he said. Of course, said Annie. Jack scrambled to his feet, still wearing his bear mask. He stood before the polar bear and pressed his hands together. We thank you, he said, bowing. Yes, we thank you forever, said Annie, also bowing. We thank you beyond the moon and the stars, and beyond the deepest sea, Annie added. Then she threw out her arms and twirled around. Jack did the same. They both danced around in the snow, honoring the bear. Finally, they stopped and bowed one last time. When they looked up, the polar bear rose up on her hind legs. She was twice as tall as Jack. She lowered her huge head as if she were bowing back to them. At that moment, the sky exploded. The night became a giant swirl of red, green, and purple lights. It looked like a genie coming out of a magic lamp. The sight took Jack's breath away. He stared in wonder as the dazzling lights lit the tundra. Is it the polar bear spirit? Annie asked, in a hushed voice. As far as Jack could see, the sky and the snow shimmered. Even the bear's fur shimmered in the strange light. No, that's not a spirit, said Jack. There's gotta be a scientific reason. I'll find out. Shaking, he reached into his backpack and pulled out the Arctic book. He took off his bear mask and put on his glasses. By the greenish glow, Jack found a picture of the skylights. The picture didn't come close to the real thing. He read aloud. One of the most amazing sights in the Arctic is the northern lights. The swirl of light is caused by electricity, electrically charged particles from the sun striking atoms and molecules in the Earth's atmosphere. Well, that's pretty complicated, but essentially the sun will, its particles will reflect off our own atmosphere in such a way that it creates this kind of greenish bluish light. It's pretty cool. See, there is a scientific reason, said Jack. It's not spirits. Then suddenly, all the dancing lights were gone, as if someone had blown out a candle. The magic had ended. Our polar bear friends and Jack and Annie looking at the shimmering sky. Well, if you asked me, I'd had to say that the magic is just beginning. So you'll all have to stay tuned for next week to see where exactly our polar bear friends and Annie and Jack find themselves. Well, stay tuned. That was Polar Bears Past Bedtime, and I am Tyler Strong. Take care.